Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. What exactly is the United Nations Association of the United States of America, commonly called UNA-USA? How is UNA-USA helping people in the United States better understand the United Nations? My guest today will respond to these and several other questions. Ambassador William Luers was elected in 1999 as President of the United Nations Association of the United States of America. Prior to joining UNA-USA in February 1999, Ambassador Luers served for 13 years as president of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Prior to his move to New York City in 1986, Ambassador Luers had a 31-year career in the Foreign Service. He served as U.S. Ambassador to the former Czechoslovakia and Venezuela, and held numerous posts in Italy, Germany, the Soviet Union, and in the Department of State, where he was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Europe and for Inter-American Affairs. Bill Luers was born in Springfield, Illinois, and received a BA from Hamilton College and an MA from Columbia University. Ambassador Bill Luers, welcome to today's Global Connection program.
Now the program's over.
It's over. No, we
read my whole bio.
We have plenty of time, but thank you so much. I appreciate you being with me today. Let's start off with a very basic question. What is the United Nations Association of the USA? And I know it's the largest foreign policy association in the United States. You have 175 chapters around the country, but what is your main goal? What is your purpose?
You know, the UNA comes out of a long history of an organization that goes back to the League of Nations. Fundamentally, those people who join it are people who believe in internationalism and the U.S. role in the world, engaged with other countries in cooperative efforts. The principal three goals of UNA, the United Nations Association, are first helping educate the American people about the importance of international cooperation, particularly the United Nations. Secondly, to strengthen the United Nations itself. We're not blind supporters of this body. We want it better, and we think it can get much better, and we work toward that goal. And third, we try, and this is the toughest job we have, to encourage stronger U.S. government participation in the United Nations. Without the United States being a strong supporter of this body, paying their dues on time, participating in all the treaties, and helping shape the future of the UN is much less, if nothing. So it's important for the world and for us, the United States, that we play that role.
And that's very important too. You mentioned you're not a cheering team for the United Nations. The UN, as with any organization, has strengths, it has weaknesses, but the important thing to remember is that the United Nations is the only game in town. It's the only international forum that brings the countries of the world together, and it's very important we learn more about the United Nations. Now, I mentioned you're a nonpartisan association, and you've had really outstanding leaders, such as former President Jimmy Carter, recently departed President
we've
Ford.
had some great chairman. Eleanor Roosevelt, of course, was one of our earlier top chairmen, and we had Earl Warren after he left the Supreme Court, Arthur Goldberg after he left being permanent representative to the United Nations, William Scranton, a Republican governor from Pennsylvania, Elliot Richardson, one of the most distinguished members of any government, but he served in several cabinet positions under President Nixon. And even James McDonnell, who founded McDonnell Douglas in St. Louis, became. So we've had a long history of active chairmen from both parties.
Well,
I didn't mention John Whitehead,
of course, former Deputy Secretary of State,
who headed Goldman Sachs and then became Deputy Secretary of State during the Reagan administration. So we have a long history of bipartisanship, and most of our chairmen happen to have been Republicans, which is a good sign.
And it's very important that you have a bipartisan approach when dealing with foreign policy. It's absolutely critical.
Particularly when you deal with the United Nations. Yeah.
Exactly, most assuredly, yes. Well, you have a wide range of programs in UNA-USA, and let's talk about a few of them. You mentioned that one of your major goals was to help educate the public about the United Nations, and one of them we've got a B-roll on in just a moment that'll be coming up is on really an outstanding program, a model United Nations program that are literally over 100,000 model UN people around the country and many around the world. But tell us a little about the Model UN program and what your goals are with this program.
Model United Nations goes back again to the 20s when they started Model League of Nations, and it's a simulated UN environment in which a student becomes an ambassador and learns how an ambassador of a country represents that country at the United Nations. And the instruction in Model UN, which is a big operation there are many thousands of young people, probably 150, 200,000 around the world, who participate in this. What we've done is we have taken this simulated UN experience, which is usually an after-school club, and we have turned it into something we call global classrooms, which introduces into the classroom to students in underprivileged parts of the city a program in the classroom to teach young people about the world, about the process of the UN, and about how to think on their feet in debating issues that relate to the country that they're represented. We found it one of the most stimulating things we do. Particularly for me, I've watched these kids come alive when they begin to be the ambassador of Russia, or the ambassador of Tanzania, or the ambassador of Venezuela. And they stand up there and they speak their piece. They learn their lines, they learn their message, they draft resolutions, and they really get into it. It's an exciting thing. And you learn about the world that way.
That's very, very important. And for most of the students, they have never probably had an opportunity to travel overseas. Many of them maybe have not read much about the United Nations, but this immerses them into it. It's certainly an excellent program.
Well, traditionally, Model UN is a program that is used very effectively by universities, particularly the Ivy League schools, by private schools and suburban schools. It's never been into the public school system in the inner city. These kids don't have exposure to the world the way the suburban kids have. So what we're doing is we're simulating this for young people in the classroom, training the teachers, so that for the first time these kids can learn something not only about the world, but how the UN operates in that world, which is something, as we say, is not taught in schools. We've done a study of the textbooks in this country, and we know that there is no generally used high school textbook which has a chapter on the United Nations. Has one chapter. They don't have one chapter. It's mentioned in relation to the Korean War, in relation to the Gulf War, as sort of a sidebar. But nobody talks about how this world operates. And for anybody who knows what goes on in the world, as I have after 50 years working in it, 70 years, is that the UN is the air we breathe. Everything that happens in this world has a UN connection.
It certainly does. And of course, it's very important that teachers understand the United Nations, because in a lot of the educational reform efforts going on in many states around the United States, it is required that they focus on the UN Charter, that they teach about the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, that they bring in these international interdependent issues, and in order to teach them, one has to know them. So it's very important, and it's a very worthwhile project. Well, that's sort of a segue into Global Classrooms. That's another program that you have, but just very briefly, in a nutshell, what is the Global Classrooms program? We talked about the Model UN program, but what do you do with Global Classrooms?
Well, I think I was sort of just describing. Global Classrooms is Model UN for the public school system, for the city public school system. It's adapting the Model UN program to the public school system through training we train the teachers how to take the curriculum that we've written, take the student guidebooks we've prepared and the teacher guidebooks, and turn it into a course in the classroom. We supply three components. We supply the material, curriculum, guidebooks, to the subject matter. We supply training for the teachers, and we provide a counselor in every city who sort of sells this product, as it were, to the schools. And then at the end of every year, we have a conference that we promote in these cities to bring all the kids, all of our Global Classrooms kids together. We're now in 12 U.S. cities, the 12 largest school districts in the United States. In some of these, we're in half the schools. And we're now in 11 or 12 cities outside the United States, capitals of major countries. And we have the funds to interchange the kids from these programs across borders. And that's what makes us really exciting and real.